Good afternoon, folks. I'm Bland Simpson of the Department of English and Comparative Literature at UNC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Frank B. Haynes Writer in Residence Program's panel on environmental justice in North Carolina. This is one of a number of events in English and Complet's 225th anniversary year here at Carolina, the next being a March 31st roundtable on the works of the late Randall Keenan and the anniversary events themselves this fall, October 28th through 30th. Please see links in the chat about how to support the Randall Keenan Memorial Fund and our anniversary celebration, the 225. Frank Haynes was an award-winning author, journalist, and poet, a farmer, conservationist, and philanthropist, and a friend indeed to all of us involved in the literary arts at Carolina and well beyond. We miss him and deeply appreciate his friendship and support, as we do that of his daughters, Nancy Haynes White and Robin Haynes, who have supported this program in their father's honor and memory for years. Environmental justice is a national movement and a major concern, born out of a grotesquely unjust event in our state almost 40 years ago. The state's action to place 60,000 tons of criminally polluted roadside earth in poor, rural, predominantly African American Warren County, less than 80 miles from Chapel Hill. To moderate our conversation today is another award-winning journalist, WUNC-FM's celebrated Leonida Inge. Welcome, Leonida.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And of course, I'm sure all of us wish we could see each other in person, but this is definitely the next best thing. You know, when I think of environmental justice, I actually think about, like the air we breathe, the water we drink, it tells like this never ending story of where we live and if we are really favored by the government. The problem is that environmental injustices mostly happen to the poor, the vulnerable, the voiceless. But today I get the opportunity to, begin a conversation with three people who actually have the power to give voice to the mostly Black and brown people suffering from environmental ills, much of it man-made, might I add. So when I think of environmental justice, I think of truth-telling. So I would like to begin by first saying a few words about Jackie Shelton Green. She is the first African-American and third woman to serve as North Carolina's Poet Laureate. She also finds time to teach documentary poetry at the Duke Center for Documentary Studies. Her writing is very organic, it's out of the South, mostly about Black and brown people. And some of it's happy, some of it's sad. And, I appreciate all of that, Jackie. We thank you for that. And she's won so many awards, but I'm actually very proud of her latest work, which includes, it's called Oh My Brother. So hopefully you'll get a chance to read, see, and hear that piece of work. The Reverend William Barber II is president and senior lecturer of Repairs of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. I remember those Moral Mondays, the ones that were in North Carolina, where it started outside the legislature. And that's where the whole world actually heard about that. And that work actually garnered him many awards, including North Carolina's highest civilian honor and a 2018 MacArthur Foundation Genius Award. And Reverend Barber, I have to also say that I've caught you on television on PBS a little bit recently, watching Henry Louis Gates' special on the Black church. And I think it was one quote you said something like, when do we go from I have a dream to bling bling? So that's my favorite quote of the whole documentary. Now, I also like to just a man that needs no introduction, our Attorney General, Josh Stein. He's in his second term as Attorney General, North Carolina's top law enforcement officer. And during his tenure, he's been very busy, very active, definitely in one arena, and that's fighting the opioid epidemic. A big announcement not too long ago, Mr. Stein helped reach a $573 million multi-state settlement with one of the world's largest consulting firms over their role in advising companies of how to promote, these drugs. That's a biggie, Attorney General, and you should be very proud of that. So thank you very much to all of you for being here. And I guess, I like to say, ladies first, I guess. I was thinking about you, Mr. Stein, but no, I like to ask Jackie, mainly, when we think about these conversations about environmental justice and we think about our neighborhoods, we think of literacy, we think of language. Well, I definitely do, because when you think of the movements of not just the world, but of our communities of the South, we have to begin with someone being able, or some people being able to lend voice and actually create and enhance a dialogue, for the movement even move, as they say. So tell me a little bit about what you consider and think about environmental justice and the language that's needed to propel that, across the globe, actually.
Thank you so much, Attorney General and Reverend Barber. It is indeed a very humbling and honorific pleasure to be with both of you. I'm happy to be in this space to share our thoughts respectfully. Thank you. From whence I enter is from the heart of thinking about the voice of the artists in all movements, in every movement in this country. So I prepared a paper, because that's what I do, that I'd like to read, so I don't ramble, but to be succinct about sort of how I show up in this space, because I know that what we really want to hear is the activism, the work, the cases, the victories, the celebrations that Mr. Stein and Reverend Barber will bring us to. I don't have those statistics, numbers, case studies, but that's what we really need to hear about. But I want to talk about artists and creative makers and how historically the artists have been able to synthesize art, science, philosophy, linguistics, ecology, and psychology into a very cohesive whole through our work as interdisciplinary artists. We've often addressed the issues around what are the social histories imbued in our landscapes. We only have to check out the work of the artist Allison Janae Hamilton, who makes it very, very clear, irrefutably clear, that when it comes to natural disaster, people of color are always in the forefront, on the front lines. In a 2018 commission for the Storm King Art Center in New York City's Hudson Valley, Hamilton installed a tower of tambourines on the island titled "The People Cried Mercy in the Storm." The haunting work memorializes the thousands of Black migrant workers killed and buried in unmarked mass graves due to two historic storms, the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 and the Okeechobee Hurricane of 1928. In recognizing these victims, Hamilton sheds light on how these climate-related disasters often reveal pre-existing social inequities. How do we investigate the landscape of America, especially of the American South? Folktales, hunting and farming signifiers, African-American nature writing, Baptist hymnals, are the work of many writers, rappers, dancers, singers, sculptors, painters, potters who illuminate how the natural world can expose deeply embedded histories of race and inequity. The environment really is a story of people and lived experience, not just the science behind it all. It's really important to look at who the most vulnerable people are. And as natural disasters, like hurricanes and other occurrences, grow more and more intense, to ask the question, how are we illuminating and shedding light on the already existing social disasters. And for me, what is my role as poet? To produce works that powerfully alter the way we think about the world and our place in it. What are the chisels? What are the many tools that I need, that all of us need? How do we create the tools that help vulnerable communities ask, how do we rise? Always remembering that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Our people know, my people know, that there was a time when people were very respectful of the environment. We know upfront and personal that the problems that we have now are a symptom of a time when people are more aggressive, more materialistic, and exploiting nature's resources to make money for their own means. But we have always been caught in the middle, asking ourselves, how do we rise? On the morning of August 28, 2005, Hurricane Katrina is elevated to a Category 5 hurricane. Patricia Smith's poetry is as powerful and as swift as Katrina herself. She takes the reader from the first warnings of the storm to the visceral reality of its devastation. And in her collection, Blood Dazzle, she documents with sorrow and passion the Crescent City before, during, and immediately after Katrina. This book is a record. Patricia Smith's poetry of witness is an unforgettable reminder that poetry can still be the news that stays news. And then if we look at the role of the last poets who rose from the late 1960s, African-American civil rights movements, Black nationalism, they rose as the hip hop forefathers who gave Black America its voice, understanding the power of commemorating Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, with the chant that America is a terrorist, killing the natives of the land. America is a terrorist with a slave system in place, reminding a new generation of hip hop to reimagine its roots in protest poetry, protest art. They're the freedom singers, Alice Walker, Amiri Baraka, Nina Simone, James Baldwin, Sonia Sanchez, Miles Davis, Childish Gambino, Sweet Honey in the Rock, Beyonce, and the list flows long of artists now and dating back even to Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, who practice what I want to call artistic activism, the combination of creating and bringing together creative power of the arts to move us emotionally with the strategic planning of activism necessary to bring about social change. Social change just doesn't happen. It happens because people decide to make a change. Artistic activism, the practice aimed at generating emotionally resonant experiences that lead to these measurable shifts in power. Artists working on the landscape of environmental racism used a landscape of signs, symbol, story, witness, and even spectacle to observe, analyze, and respond creatively. People don't share policy papers, they share things that move them. In the civil rights movement, activists drew upon the stories and songs, the political reenactments, and the participatory culture of the Black church. The Black church calling America to task for its racist past and also how to articulate a better future. And throughout history, the most effective civil actors have married the arts with campaigns for social change, using aesthetic approaches to provide a critical perspective on the world as it is and how we might imagine the world as it should be. And still asking, how do we rise? The Odawa Indians in northern Michigan point to a deep belief in the sacredness of water that underpins the concern that their community has traditionally held for this resource, especially a prophecy by their native ancestors that says, water is going to be worth more than gold. We rise working artfully to make activism effective. The Odawa tribe founded the Water is Life Festival in 2018 in partnership with Oil and Water Don't Mix, a coalition of nearly 100 organizations working together to protect the Great Lakes. The festival runs Clean Water Campaign, which uses storytelling and music to inspire people to create change related to various crises related to Michigan's water, including lead contamination in Flint's drinking water, and the fact that Nestle paid only $200 a year to the state to pump groundwater and sell it to the masses for a profit. The Water is Life Festival is one of several examples of how activists are using the combination of art and science to keep water issues in the public consciousness, to address water injustice, and to collaborate on solutions. How do we rise? Bell Hook says that the function of art is to do more than to tell it like it is. It is to imagine what is possible. Members of Durham's Art Ain't Innocent magnify these words by working together to create more equity, particularly racial equity in the arts community. 44 artists come together the weekend of June 5th to the 17th, 2020, and created 42 murals on storefronts in downtown Durham after the protest and death of George Floyd. Other art communities across the nation and internationally launched very similar initiatives to amplify the message behind self-expression during a time of tension and change, not as a beautification effort, but to echo voices rising up. As a cultural and social activist, my poems should ask again and again, what can we do with what we see and live through? How do I, the poet, utilize memory as action and vision and writing as action? How does my art force continue to force me to invite myself to consider the things sometimes unrecognized, the things that my two brothers would talk about? How do I, the poet, remember that my love of people and my love of place inform my sensibility and consciousness as an active experience inside my poems? But the question is always, how do we rise together? And I believe that we rise together first as compassionate listeners. Thank you, and please listen compassionately to these amazing feats of our day.
Mm. Well, thank you very much. That was a beautiful perspective, one that we needed to ground us in this conversation. So, Reverend Barber, what moves you now? I guess when you think of all of the environmental justice woes, I know that your work in advocacy, has exposed you to a lot of neighborhoods that I'm sure just really turn your stomach. And I was actually reading about one of your visits in the new book by Catherine Coleman Flowers in Lowndes County, Alabama, and how you got to visit that area. But yeah, tell me what moves you when you think of this conversation?
Well, first of all, I'm just moved by being in this environment, and I'm humbled to be a part of it. And I'm so thankful for our dear poet laureate for grounding us in activism. And she said it's not just Bell Hooks to tell it like it is, but in a sense to imagine what it ought to be. You took me to Lowndes County. I didn't know I would go there emotionally first, but I'm thinking now of the woman and all of the homes that every week have to have mobile tank trucks come and soak and draw out the sewage that's in their yards. The kids are playing their sewage. And the one lady who came out in a wheelchair and said, nobody cares. I have every disease except AIDS. And it's come from all of this pollution and sewage. And the thing about it, the same land used to be used to be where the slave huts were. And then when they got finished doing that, they made it the sharecropper land. And then they dug out so much from that land that it made it low land. And then somebody down in Alabama, we're fighting them, looking at some lawsuits, figured out a way to scam and sell the land to Black people, knowing that the land was too low, it wouldn't perk and it would cause all kinds of problems. So there's a lot of lying and a lot of lust for money that now literally has people that wait on trucks every week, not mail trucks, not bread trucks, but sewage trucks. Can you imagine that every week to put a hose in their front yard and soak up their own sewage 3 times a week, and they can't move because they can't afford it. And people have known, and the lady talked about how they felt so abandoned. I could talk about a lot of places, and and even though it is true that percentage-wise, black and brown people are affected the most by environmental injustice, percentage-wise, it's also like poverty. For instance, poverty and poor and low wealth impacts 60% of Black people, which is like 26 million people. But poverty and low wealth in raw numbers impacts 66 million white people. So in raw numbers, is the oppression that's targeted at poor and low wealth people, poor and low wealth Black people, or Black people and brown people, or Native people, actually has a collateral damage that in raw numbers hurts more white people, poor and low wealth white people, which is why we have to do what Dr. King knew we had to do, is bring the communities together that have been so traditionally separated. Now, as a theologian, though, I think about this first from the Bible before I get into the stories. Before we get out of the first book of the Bible, environmental theology is on the table. The Bible says that God says, everything I made it very good. Tov me out is the word. Tov me out means very good. That's the Hebrew word. And then the next word says, and that humankind is to ravda is the Hebrew word, which means to hold over or to cover over or to have the responsibility to care for as benevolent leaders. Dominion is the word. The rada is that we call it. We say in English is dominion. I don't like that word because in Hebrew it's rada. It's not a word. It's a concept. And the concept is that you've been given, told me out, things that are very good, and you're to be good to it and good for it, and you're to be about good things. Now, when we think about environmental injustice, and the Poor People's Campaign, we say that there are 5 interlocking injustices, and that is systemic racism, systemic poverty, Anita, ecological devastation, denial of healthcare, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And they are what we call interlocking injustices, that in some ways they all are connected together. And you have to address them together from our deepest moral centered moral places. One of the things the reason we have to address together, because the last time I checked, now maybe some of the more able people on this call can help me, I might be wrong. Last time I checked, we got one planet that at least we can live on. We have one life that at least we know about. We don't know about the other one. We can imagine the other one, we don't know about it. We have one state. We've got one chance. You do not get to make up the destruction. You can't just correct it. And then we have one people. And I'll stop here and come back to something later, but I never will forget when we were down in Duplin County. I come from a tradition of persons who have worked in. My father marched in Warren County in the 80s with Leon White. My father was a part of that. He's deceased now. In the place that's called the birthplace of environmental justice movement from a deep moral and religious perspective. But I never will forget a few years ago, in fact, it was during Moral Monday, we get a call and we found out that down in Duplin County, there was a plant there that wanted to get approval. They had given a lot of money to members of the legislature, black and white. So it wasn't just white people, black and white had taken money from them. And they named themselves as a chicken manure burning plant out of the UK. I'm going somewhere with this. And You know, it sounds so, okay, we don't want a bunch of chicken manure hanging around. So if everybody can burn it up and turn it into energy, good thing, right? Good, good. And so a lot of politicians just said yes, because they got a little money into their campaigns and they're going to burn up the chicken manure. The chicken manure is going to create energy and the chicken manure plant's going to create jobs. Well, we looked into it and we found out, number one, they were putting the chicken burning, manure burning plant in the Black community. Number two, nobody had told the folk that when you take fire and connect it to chicken manure, you produce airborne arsenic. Nobody else also told her that it would be 100-foot smokestack. And so when we came down, I remember the NAACP and some of the more, I guess they call themselves conservative, I don't like that language. NAACP, get out of here, so and so and so and so. And even some of the white farmers were against us. And I went to meet with them. And I said, what do you all grow? They said, we grow sweet potatoes and we grow cabbage. I said, who do you sell it to, Gerber? I said, well, what do you think Gerber's gonna think when they find out that your cabbage and your sweet potatoes are in a county where over the county there's 100-foot smokestack putting airborne arsenic in the air, and that's mixing with the rain that's coming down. Then the farmer said, oh, I think I like the NAACP. Let's join up together. And we got on the back of tractors and everything. But my point is, folks just often don't know, and they don't realize how we are one people, that you can't destroy somebody else's community environmentally without it eventually coming downstream or down air to you. And that's the place I would always want us to start. We get lied to by corporations by suggesting that they can put things in certain communities and it's going to impact them. And they're right, it will impact them first. But ultimately, if it's environmental and if it's near a water tablets don't stay in communities, they run. Air does not stay in one community, it flows. So eventually, what you do to one community, you do it to the whole world. You do it to the whole state. And I think we need to start approaching this issue from that perspective.
I definitely think that's correct. And we know, and definitely in Flint, Michigan, they're finding that out, still finding that out every day, actually, as they fight their water woes. You know, Attorney General Stein, Reverend Barber mentioned, you know, sometimes you think there's a lot of lying and a lot of lust for money, you know, going on when you think of environmental justice. And I wonder, do you think that, you know, when you think of environmental justice and environmental injustices, say even in North Carolina, do you think about money? Because sometimes I think about money because on one hand, you have people who are trying to make money, sometimes off of a disadvantaged group. And on the other hand, you need money, you know, to right a lot of these man-made wrongs, right? And since you're good at winning these, you know, multi-million-dollar lawsuits and getting these settlements, I just wonder, do you think about money that way? And especially with some of the cases in this state, you know, what could actually right some of these wrongs?
Absolutely, Leonida. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for moderating, and always an honor to be with my good friend, Reverend Barber, and Jackie Shelton Green. Thank you for being here. And I think it's really interesting to have the perspective of an artist, writer, and a theologian and national civil rights and social justice leader, and then an elected official law enforcement officer, because we each have a unique perspective on this issue. First, I think it's helpful to have a concept of what environmental justice means. And for me, what it is that it's about ensuring that all people, no matter where you live, how much money you have, the color of your skin, are treated fairly by and engaged in shaping environmental policies. Because we know that the costs of air and water pollution are not shared evenly. People of color and people facing poverty disproportionately live near industrial plants and experience all the resulting harms to the air and the water. They also suffer, as Jackie mentioned, disproportionately the effects of the climate crisis. They experienced the worsened flooding that happened here in Eastern North Carolina. It happened in Louisiana and Katrina. So this is an issue, environmental justice and environmental protection, that I take exceptionally seriously because my job's all about protecting the people of North Carolina. And if you protect people, you have to protect the air that people breathe. You have to protect the water that they drink. And just a couple of big cases, as you mentioned, Leonida. One, on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality, we reached an agreement with Chemours. Chemours is a chemical plant just outside of Fayetteville that had been discharging a chemical called Gen-X into the Cape Fear River and emitting it into the air. And this affected both the surface water of the Cape Fear River and people who drank out of that, as well as people who lived within a few miles and their wells were impacted by the chemical seeping into the groundwater. Well, as a result of that agreement, Chemours paid the largest environmental fine in state history, committed to investing $200 million to reduce the air emissions by 99.9%, and provided a guarantee to people whose drinking water nearby was affected that they would have clean drinking water. On this issue of Gen-X, it's a forever chemical. It's one of a type of chemical called PFAS. And these are chemicals that once they're in the water, they don't degrade. There's no natural biodegrading. And when it gets in human body, it bioaccumulates. It doesn't go away, whether it's in the water you drink or the plants you eat. And unfortunately, it's not only this one firm, this one outfit in Fayetteville that has discharged these chemicals into North Carolina. It's in a number of places. And so I launched a statewide investigation last year. I've actually sued DuPont and Chemours over this Fayetteville Works plant to make them pay to clean up the mess that their chemical has created and the damage to our natural resources. But we are also investigating other folks who made money, to your point, Leonida. It fundamentally comes down to people wanting to make money. Another big case that we did on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality concerned Duke Energy and its coal ash facilities. Again, if you look at the siting of these coal power plants across North Carolina, they tend to be in communities of people who don't have as much money. And so the toxins from coal ash seep into groundwater, impacting people's health and welfare. So originally the deal was Duke was going to excavate 40 million tons. We just reached a deal at the end of last year where they are now excavating 80 million tons of coal ash. This is the largest excavation of coal ash in the history of the country. They're going to have to line the pits and put the coal ash back, and it will serve to ensure that our drinking water is clean. Additionally, I had to bring a number of actions against the Trump administration to block rules that would have dramatically weakened environmental protections that would have had massive environmental justice implications in North Carolina. So just on climate crisis and air pollution, I had to sue over the Clean Power Plan, the Clean Car Standards, our government's most effective responses to the climate crisis, a dirty power rule he tried to implement, a dirty truck loophole, offshore drilling off the coast of North Carolina, weakening of mercury and air toxins, methane emissions, all of these pollutants that enter the air disproportionately hurt people of color and people without wealth. On water, they tried to weaken the Clean Water Act and the protections we have to ensure we have sufficient wetlands so that when there is a flood resulting from a hurricane, that the ground can absorb that. And then on environmental protection matters more broadly, the Trump administration put forward in the last 2 weeks of its administration a censored science rule that would require the EPA to suppress scientific studies, including those that have certain community-based health data, from being considered when it makes a rule. And another rule, changing the cost-benefit rule that the EPA operates under, that would prevent the Biden administration from evaluating the health benefits of environmental protections. The benefits that could happen. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. And frankly, it takes all of us. It takes artists, it takes community leaders, and it takes governmental officials, but we have to work hand in hand to make sure that our natural resources are protected and that people are treated properly and fairly.
May I jump?
Yes, you can jump in.
Yeah, I'm glad that Attorney General mentioned those and how it does take all of us, because my son is actually an environmental physicist and went to law school as well and does environmental work. He actually works with Al Gore and climate justice and training people all over the world. And one of the things, when Gore, a lot of people got mad with Gore, a lot of politicians, a lot of people in his party, when he did the piece on inconvenient truth. And forced us to say, this is not a joke, y'all. This is serious stuff. And I was sitting here reading some, why is it? The Attorney General says, like, poor people, Black people and brown people are the closest to the plants, the closest to the hog lagoons. Why? And I was just jotting down, almost in a prose, Madam Poet Laureate, not in a rhythmic way. The rhythmic in this, what I was writing down was why. And I said, I think Amira Barker wrote a question, poem. If you ask who, then you'll know why, right? So now I'm saying, understand the why, then you understand the how it gets this way. So why? First of all, we have to know that in this state alone, we want to know how a state is doing. The question I believe we ought to ask is, how are the poor people doing? So in our state, right now in the 21st century, 48% of North Carolinians are poor and low income. Think about that for a minute. I didn't say 4% or 14%. I didn't say 40% Black people. 48% of North Carolinians are poor and low wealth. 4.7 million residents in our state right now as we speak. In our state alone right now as we speak, we have 1 million people uninsured, and a state that's refused to just accept even expanded healthcare. And this connects to an atmosphere of disrespect. 43,456 tons of nitrooxygens are annually admitted into North Carolina, a leading cause of respiratory problems. Right now in North Carolina, there are 32.2% of census tracts are at risk for being able to afford water. 9,000 people are homeless. 2 million workers make less than $15 an hour. 49.7% of the population, almost 50% of the population. Now, why aren't those things the major things we talk about during elections? If you ask that why, you'll understand how some of this stuff gets like it is. Think about that now. If you've never heard in a presidential election in North Carolina, a senatorial election, a gubernatorial, on any side of the aisle, a major campaign around the poor. You always hear the middle class and up. So you either get neoliberalism from the Democrats or you get trickle down from the Republicans. Even though you got 50% of your people, 50%, not 15. That in itself, before you get to the physicality around environmental injustice, the philosophy of ignoring and othering and marginalizing in our words, the very atmosphere of our politics is a form of environmental justice. The political environment is unjust. We're not even talking about it. And we get consultants that tell candidates don't talk about it. So that's a why. Second why do they live so close? Well, zoning. The companies don't just go there. They go there and somebody votes to open up the zone to allow a coal ash plant or to allow a pipeline. Next why. Why does that happen? Because corporations spread around a lot of money. They spread around a lot of money, right? Well, why? Because why does this happen? Because too often they get approvals too easy by the oversight agencies. Look at how we've approved stuff, and then 10 and 15 years later, somebody said, well, it was bad and we knew it then. It's always after the fact. It's never before the fact. And you can't tell us that all this technology, all this education, all these schools in North Carolina, that we can't know stuff on the front end. That's what, and then another why. Why did that happen? Why does that often happen? Well, this is going to be a hard one for some people to hear, is because they pay off advocacy groups.
Mm.
Now, this is the hard one to hear. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. We were fighting the Dominion and the pipeline. And we had people in that movement that would say Dominion would send people to them. When we were fighting Dominion, headed into federal court in Virginia, in the Fourth Circuit, Dominion offered the NAACP in Virginia $50,000 that would be promoted. Dominion, that is the pipeline company that's destroying Black communities and would have destroyed Native communities, and they took it. And I'm a member. That's why I'm so bothered by that. And it's not just up them. Up took the money and put it in the paper to give Dominion kind of this cover. And Dominion did it intentionally so that they would look good, look like they really cared about the community. And when advocacy groups are too often given resources, and then that causes a hesitancy in the very groups that ought to be advocating for Black and brown community. That's another why. And lastly, why? And this is a why. I'm so glad Josh Stein is suing folk and getting money, and he's got a whole lot of money. But here's another thing too, why these companies keep doing this. Because we got technology. A lot of times the companies buy the patents of the technology that could change things and hold those patents. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff going around. I didn't know this until I started learning from my son. But one of the reasons companies do, because they still don't pay enough. Now, to us, $500 million sounds like a lot, and it is. And it is historic, especially when there used to not be zero. So that 500, but how much does a life cost? How much does a community of lives cost? You know, most of these settlements, they never have to pay the people they hurt. In our movement, there's a song we sing and our poet Lord, you would love this. It's called "Somebody's Hurting Our Brothers and Sisters," and it's gone on far too long, and it won't be. We won't be silent anymore. Yara Allen, who's a theomusicologist for the National Poor People's Campaign, wrote that song in one writing, sitting in Reedsville, North Carolina, when we were hearing the testimony of a woman who had been poisoned by coal ash. And she stood up to say, I'm going to tell you my story because I will probably not be here to see you when you come back again. And she died a few weeks later. And when Yara heard her story and how she was able to talk about all of the potential problems you get from coal ash, and then name how her medical record said she had it, even though the company was saying nothing was wrong, even though not one politician, this to otherwise, none of this stuff gets put in wealthy communities. It wouldn't be if they tried to put coal ash in certain communities. It wouldn't even have to be wealthy white communities, wealthy Black communities. You wouldn't get up. And Yara sat there with tears in her eyes and wrote, somebody's poisoning our water. Somebody's poisoning our water. And it's gone on far too long.
This cycle definitely is, sadly, the cycle that I've known my whole life, and I'm sure my parents knew their whole lives. And I just would like to think that that it will one day stop. You know, we think of racism and we think of all sorts of injustices. You know, you just like hope that, you know, when you do get the big settlement, you know, will it really help the people who are affected the most? And I guess we can keep dreaming and hoping and praying about that.
I don't think so until people go to jail. I don't think so until we have to pay for not only the land and clean up the ash, but, well, I'm gonna say this in a way probably people wouldn't expect me to say it. It ain't gonna happen just because we clean up the ash. It's only gonna happen when some asses go to jail. And to have to, and I'm just being straight, and have and people know you can be a CEO, just like in Flint, until some of those folk get charged with murder, governmental murder, policy murder, it's not gonna happen. You know what? A lot of us were mad when Obama went up there and drank that water. Y'all remember that? I loved him, but you know, he drank that water. We were like, no, don't do that. And so until some people go to jail, until companies have to pay for their lives, and I mean pay for their lives, some of them will make 20 billion and pay a $500 million fine. Now, I'm not anti the fine. I want Josh to do what he's doing and more. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we, the public, we got to organize, get people in office and get stronger laws on the book. And there's going to have to be some criminal convictions. Not just civil. I heard my dear sister say, you can't, what did you say about the empire? You can't use the tools of the empire and something she said. What did you say, sister?
You cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools.
Right. So the master's tool is money. One of them. He loves money. So if all he has to do is just pay money, they'll figure out a way to write that into the evil. Okay, let's have a little extra money over here. So because we know we're gonna get fined, but by the time we get fined, we'll have made $10 billion. So if we have to pay 500 million, or let's put some politicians over here to guarantee that the suit can't be but so high. Until there's some criminal charge, same thing police reform. Until some folk can be sent, not just by state law, by federal law, charged with murder and put in jail, then there's going to be a certain level at which they will not stop it.
Well, I know our Attorney General wants to put some people probably.
I hope so.
What they do. You know, I know you have to leave, Josh Stein, but I guess any short comments or even rebuttal. I mean, I know you have a lot to think about. Especially hearing it from this group, you know, who definitely appreciate your work, but in a way wants you to do more, you know?
I want me to do more. And part of my ability to do more is to have additional authority. Like, I don't have the authority to bring a criminal charge.
Exactly.
So my authority is civil. So when there's some company that does wrong, I can hold them civilly accountable. I can take out all their ill-gotten gains. And just to Reverend Barber's position about, we don't want this just to be a cost of doing business. The fine that we got, the payment we got from McKinsey was at least a 6-fold increase over all the fees they earned over 15 years. Mm-hmm. And so this hurt. This was not cost of doing business. This came out of a lot. I mean, look, they have a lot of money, they can pay it, but it was not a painless experience for them. And so I try to do the best I can with the authority I have to try to do right by people. And there are times when I'm frustrated that I can't do more. And sometimes we're faced with really, really difficult choices in that, do you take a certain amount, a meaningful amount of money that can actually, if we get it, it will save people's lives, versus is that not going to hold them accountable enough? And is there ever a way we could adequately hold them accountable for the damage they have done? And this is something I'm wrestling with in a specific case right now. And so these are real issues. They're moral, philosophical issues. And there's not always a single right answer. And all we can ask, or all I ask of myself, is that I struggle and ultimately try to do the thing that I think is going to be of the best value to the most people, understanding that very good people of goodwill can come to an alternative conclusion and would have come to a different decision.
And
well, thank you. I think Mr. Stein may have to leave us right now, but I wanted to thank him for joining us. But what were we going to say, Reverend?
Stay 30 seconds, John. Because what he said, he just said something to us where it's not just, okay, the politician get elected and we step back.
Mhm.
A third of the American public now, electorate, is poor and low wealth people. 65 million people are poor and low wealth. We just did a study that said in 15 states, if poor and low wealth people vote between 1 and 19%, 19% in North Carolina, 1% in Michigan, 4% in Florida, they can fundamentally change who sits in the Senate, presidency, and the state houses. You cannot talk about dealing with environmental justice without talking about voting rights, voter participation, and running people for office who raise these issues when they run and who win, who can then change the statutes, right? That then give the criminal authority. See, and then secondly, that you also cannot talk about this issue without factoring in that there's going to be times that there's going to have to be massive nonviolent action. So just what happened in Warren County. They talked and prayed and talked and prayed and talked and prayed and talked and prayed. It wasn't until they laid down in front of those trucks and said, we're not going to be poisoned anymore. Leon White told me people were getting cancer and were praying about the cancer and bringing in doctors about the cancer. He said one night he decided to go driving, and he went out one night and he caught one of those trucks with the pipe putting it out in the ditch. And he went back and told the church folk, we got to get off our knees because it's not the that isn't working. It's not the doctors that aren't working. It's stopping the trucks that's coming in. And so it takes all of this, you see. And when I hear an attorney general say to me, I wish I could do more, then that's a sign and a signal to us now, right? We have to have a massive movement. That's what the Poor People's Campaign is about, that fundamentally changes the narrative and builds power in a way that's not just rooted in money and greed. And then that power must be used to change statutes. And those statutes must be made so that if you do something with your business that costs people their lives, their livelihoods, there's a cost to that. You know, Coretta Scott King said, this policy violence is as deadly as gun violence. Bad policy kills. There's a death measurement. The Columbia University did a study, and I'm through, I know he's got to go. They did a study that showed 250,000 people were dying a year, 700 people a day from poverty before COVID. Before COVID. So policies are not benign. They are very much violent and deadly. And our statutes have to start reflecting that. Otherwise, the corporate powers feel as though they can get away literally with the destruction of whole communities.
Well, thank you, Reverend Barber.
Thank you.
Exactly. Leonida, it was a pleasure to be with all of y'all.
Well, thank you very much. And I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I can do nothing. It's so overwhelming to think of what needs to be done. I think about it in my reporting because I haven't done a lot of environmental justice reporting as much as I used to and as much as I want to. So I wanted to, I guess one of the first big stories I covered when I moved to North Carolina was actually in Moore County. And you know what, Jackie, I wrote a little haiku for you.
Thank you.
It's very, I mean, because I just was thinking about, what, how that experience affected me. And I know this may be a haiku, it may be too long. I know it's 3 lines, right? And so I say, the manicured lawns and courses for golf. How does the water flow? Not to Jackson Hamlet. So that's my haiku because I spent so much time in Jackson Hamlet and the fight of how Moore County, where the golf resort, where Pinehurst is, and how they would not extend those water lines to a neighboring community, to help with infrastructure, to help with clean water, to help be able to get rid of those septic leaking tanks, and I'm like, wow, this is happening just an hour or so away from, Chapel Hill. Oh my, how could that be? And so it's almost like all of us need to write a little bit more, read a little bit more, and then make sure we disperse this out into the universe. And that's why we have you here. Right, Jackie?
Yeah, thank you. 30 years ago, I worked for legal services for many, many, many years. And North State Legal Services, I'm very proud to say I worked for a legal aid office that was the first to have an environmental justice attorney. And I was her paralegal and community educator, and my background in community economic development, I worked a lot with low wealth communities, right where you're talking about in Moore County. And I remember those stories. And I'm also remembering today the Imperial Chicken plant fire. And it's a poem that I wrote about. I wrote a poem about the chicken plant fire. And I don't want to say it's one of my favorite poems, but I felt like it was the poem that truly allowed me to be a vessel of witness, having moved forth to interview the families. Like Patricia Smith went to New Orleans and interviewed the families of people who'd lost their lives in Hurricane Katrina, but to memorialize and the power of story. And as Dr. Barber was talking, Dr. Barber, you just like really every time I hear you speak, you really make me, you exemplify what I believe in when I talk about the power of utterance. What does it mean to utter? What does it mean to step inside of that utterance? And that is my doorbell you hear ringing. What does it mean to step inside of that utterance and give voice to it? And I'm thinking about the Maasai tribe right now that greet each other with Kasarian and Jere, which means, and how are the children? Mm-hmm. And the response is Sapate and Jere, the children are well. And I think until America can find the strength, the courage, or whatever, I don't even know what the words are. I don't have language for this. What do we need to find so we can truly, because we cannot say the children are well. Mm-mm. We cannot collectively say any of our children are well. So inside of all of this story and language and activism and, the hours and the sleepless nights, I'm sure, Reverend Barber, and the agonizing with trying to strategize, like, what is the language? What is the language that we need to give to our low wealth communities? And how, I also think about how a lot of our communities have normalized some of the very conditions that we're talking about. They've been there forever. And those same people we're talking about who created these conditions, the education we have is that it's normal. It's normal. I've talked to people and asked them about these really, really bad things. Oh, we've been dealing with this since I'm 50 years old. That's how I grew up. Mm-hmm. So what is the work that we have to do to say to people, no, this is not normal. This is not normal. Your water is not clean. If you've never had clean water, maybe you don't know what clean water is. So, how do we link hands as, I was sitting inside of that sister's song that you said she wrote before she died. I have a daughter that I lost to cancer 12 years ago. And Imani came to me in a dream and asked me to walk with her through our community. And she took me to every single household in the neighborhood she grew up in. A lot of houses, over 200 and some houses. And she kept pointing out all the family members that had died from cancer in each and every of those families. I believe that I grew up in a cancer alley. Mm-hmm. I believe I grew up in a cluster and my children grew up in a cluster. I've tried to have this conversation with Orange County commissioners, a few. who never got around to making it important to come walk with me and to hear this entire story. So Reverend Barber, thank you, because today I feel more empowered to think about how I might begin tackling something that is buried and pushing folk to help me uncover what those cancer clusters might be. You know, and I do believe not just my community, I think that there's so many untold stories that we don't know about. We know about the cases that we're working on, you're working on, but I believe that there are as many more that we know nothing about.
Mhm.
So
And
how do we bring them with us?
you know, and my dear sister just said something. We have to incarnate this pain. I think the fact of the matter that we leave so much of it into just facts. You know, I tell my liberal, so-called progressive friends, I don't like titles like that. That very often we're great with numbers, but not great with faces. We got to combine the two. So, for instance, when Yara Allen wrote that song about the sister who was dying, she's an artist, Jackie, and I want her to meet you. Y'all may already know each other, but she's a poet and a songwriter and a theomusicologist, not just a singer. And in that moment, she had to grab that woman's story to incarnate it, to put rhythm to it. Now it is the mantra of the movement sung all over the country. We even sung it at the Vatican and people and told the story. I think we have to do more of that. I think when we talk about how do we do this, how do we, Leonida, how do we fight it? Well, first of all, let's just conclude, just go ahead and settle one thing. Every generation has its fights, and that's just the way it is. Every generation will have its abolition movement of something. You won't have to absolve, you know, every generation is going to have its Edmund Pettus Bridge. So maybe we need to just go ahead and solve that. And then I was been raising a question for some of us in the midst of what happened to George Floyd, and when his "I can't breathe" also is shorthand for a lot of people are being suffocated by a lot of other things, whether it's poverty, whether it's environmental justice. It's like when he said, "I can't breathe," what drew so many people was not just what was happening to him, but what was happening to so many. The literal feeling of not being able to breathe, and the literal feeling of not just a feeling, but not breathing. And so some of us have been flipping that over. So in the midst of COVID, for instance, where there's been so much negligence and so much hurt, so much, you know, the poorest of people have been the first to have to work, the first to have to get sick, the first to get infected, die, and the first to be denied, you know, healthcare and denied live with. So what do I do with my breath if I'm still breathing? Now, I could get real arrogant and say, well, you know, God kept me through everybody else and I'm better than them and that's why I'm here. But I think that's not quite the way to go. So then there's another question. If I have found out in these last few months that breath is such an elusive commodity, that breath is a thing that just 6 minutes without it takes your world from you. And I've seen that happen to so many people. Then maybe the question is not, why am I still breathing, but what will I do with the breath that's left? Whether it's 7 minutes, 7 days, 70 years, or whatever. And then secondly, what things make no sense to waste my breath on? Like arguing with people about whether or not I'm gonna stand up for justice. I'm not wasting any breath on that anymore. Or figuring out whether or not I should challenge a corporation that's killing a whole group. I'm not wasting any breath. I just don't have the energy, the breath. It's too precious. So I'm not wasting it on that. And then how can we use the breath we have to breathe these stories alive, to breathe these struggles alive? I think what we see in America right now, from Black Lives to Sunrise to the Poor People's Campaign, is in a sense movements that are trying to breathe something into this democracy, into this society. And I think this is our calling in this moment. And so if we get those things settled, then and we decide that along with what we're doing, I wrote down we have to have the facts, we have to put a face on the facts, and then we have to have the force of a movement. that's it. I mean, we have to do that if we're going to deal with this environmental injustice. And it can't be one day. And I tell my environmental justice friends, I was working with a group of them, I spoke it from the Sunrise, and I said to them, and if you aren't concerned about racism and voter suppression stuff, you aren't serious about voter suppression, because I mean, environmental injustice, because the same people that hurt the environment, the same people that hurt Black people are the same people hurting the environment. Same people cutting public education are the same people hurting the environment. So if they are cynical enough to be together, surely we ought to be smart enough to come together and build an intersectional movement that will contradict and counter these interlocking injustices. And then one last thing, Leonardo, Jürgen Moltmann helps me in my moments of hurt. He was a theologian. And he wrote this one time, because I think I cannot leave out of the fact of all of this, that the church and religious bodies have been too doggone quiet in these matters. And as a group of clergy that have decided we're not lying over no more people's graves. If somebody dies because they didn't get health care, we're not going to get up there and say, God called them home. We may say God will receive them home, but we're not going to get up there and lie and say, the Lord, it was just their time. If they died from environmental, no, we're going to preach the truth. And sometimes we're going to ask the family, but can we get the media to come here and film this, like Mamie Tills let the media in to see her son, so we can point and say, look, this is what bad environmental policy looks like. This is what denial of healthcare looks like. Because we have to refuse to allow these things to be put in the blinders. And Jürgen Moltmann says this, he says, faith, wherever it develops into hope, causes not rest, but unrest. Not patience, but impatience. It does not calm the unquieted heart, but is itself this unquieted heart in humanity. Those who hope in God can no longer put up with reality as it is, and they will begin to suffer under it as a way of contradicting it. And I add, and even if they don't change it, they never accept it. They never accept it. And they spend, as Dr. King said, a lifetime with an eternal discontent toward the injustices that are. And inside of that internal discontent is the hope. Despair actually lives where you lose your discontent. There's a sense in which I have to have a level of despair in order to have a certain amount of hope.
I don't think we want that all the time, do we? No.
Nope.
No, we don't. The cycle that you're referring to mostly is, people say, well, why do they live there if sewage is all on the ground? Or why do you do that? Or what are you going to do about it? And how come you haven't done anything about it? And it goes back to, again, the voiceless and the poor, because sometimes they're so tired, they're trying to stay alive. So I guess the last thing, if they could just, sweep a little more dirt this way and be able to feed their families just one more day, then that's what they do. And they need help. They need all of our help. And
Structural help.
And Reverend Barb, we all need to raise our voices a lot, and I need to write more and do more as well. And also to listen. So when I grew up, I didn't grow up there. I lived there as a small child, just a little while in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. And one of my aunts would always say, she just wouldn't drink the water ever. Because she was like, and people would say, oh, the water is just brown, but it tastes good. It's fine. And my mother would always tell me that story, like Aunt Irma was like boiling and bottling water 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not drinking that water. And, but everybody was like, it's fine. And, but it was so much sulfur or whatever in that water that it was not fine. But did they listen to her? And do we listen to people when we see things wrong sometimes, we're just so burdened with life sometimes that we just we want to listen. And then sometimes we don't have the strength to even tell. I consider myself a tattletale, but sometimes
Right.
we don't even tell. So maybe to close out our great conversation, maybe last comments from both of you this hour. Jackie, Shelton Green, anything you'd like to say?
I want to think close with something that I've been sort of saying all week, and that's James Baldwin told us a long time ago that until America can learn to love itself, because America does not love itself. America's never been in love with itself. Until America can learn how to love itself, it will not need other people to hate. It will not need us to hate. So I think about the greed, the capitalism, and everything that is the foundation, the underpinning of this conversation about environmental injustice, environmental racism. Until this country finds a way to love itself, it cannot love me. And I'm very clear on that. I'm very clear on that. And I'm very clear on the work that we all have with us so that we all can, in one voice, collectively say the children are well. All of our children are well. Does not mean your child in your gated community is well. She's not well unless my child in public housing where the water is green, until that child is well. So that's where I'd like to, I think, end here. I want to thank Dr. Barber for this moment of being in communion, being in conversation, and for certainly helping me think about how I might be a more empowered cultural activist and social activist. So thank you both. Thank you to the University of North Carolina for this moment, for this appointment with Dr. Barber as the Frank Haynes Writers in Residence. It's been a joy.
Well, thank you very much. And also just a reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available on the English and Comparative Literature website, or just wherever you register for this event, you can find a link of this event. So maybe Reverend Barber, very quickly, you can just, do you need to lead us in prayer? No.
Well, I almost led an appointment. I got scared. I remembered who I was on the line with, and I said that you don't sing in the presence of a singer, and you don't do poet in the presence of a poet laureate. So let me stay in this place for one more moment. You know, I was going to bring up today, for instance, and I think we have to keep bringing things up. So, for instance, well, we talk about, you know, what the Attorney General did in some settlements. You know, I'm sitting here looking at how Smithfield Foods and in 2000, and since then has joined in with Dominion, the same company we just stopped from bringing in the pipeline. Now they want to do biogas. And biogas production relies on outdated waste management systems that allow storing untreated hog manure and urine in uncovered pits where the solid waste falls to the bottom and the liquid rises to the top. This is another you can go. Now, this is the same company we just blocked. We are going to have to raise another piece of this. And Dr. King raises it in the 5th chapter of his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, where he talks about the three powers we must have. First one being ideological power, the second one political, and then economic power. But under the political power, he says, if we're going to critique race, we must also critique those who look like Black and brown people in power and what they are doing. Because it shouldn't just be the people have to engage and march and do Moral Monday and do all those things. You know, I want to know, you know, are the state legislators who are Black? You know, I remember when we found, I told you that chicken manure, we found Black legislators were on the payroll of the company. We said, what is wrong with you? I mean, and that's an honest thing we have to do. It's a love matter, because the positions you hold are dipped in blood. and the positions you hold, you are put there to specifically look out for this particular community. And by doing so, you look out for the whole. You're not really put there to be a part of the what is just to be there. So I think the pulpit and the politicians, we have to own a lot of responsibility. And the people have to not back up on that. But then lastly, we can't forget the agency of the people. When I went down to Duplin County, I didn't go to lead the people. I went to be with the people. I went to bring the media to talk to them, not to talk to me. When we went to Alabama, that was the goal. And we helped the people find their voice. And now they have their lawyers. And now they are wearing their county out and their county commissioners. And that's it. And in the Poor People's Campaign, we nationalized state movement. I'm not so much a national leader as a national servant. And we go places to help people get the tools. A lot of times they show us tools they already have. It's not that people haven't been fighting. Sometimes they've been ignored. And so if we go there and it happens to bring in the kind of press they need, the kind of galvanizing they need, then we do that for that purpose. But we believe in the agency of the people, the agency of the people. And a young lady told me this just the other day. I was working with some workers down in Mississippi. And she said, Reverend Baba, we are clear about one thing. When we move, they have to move. When we move, they have to move. And so, yes, communities take things for a long time. Yes, they don't have options. You know, as you heard me say right now in this country, we pay people $7.25 an hour minimum wage and think that that's something. And we have a debate going on right now as to whether or not people deserve 15, which is 57 years late because Dr. King and the March on Washington and the agenda then asked for $2 an hour, which would be 15 today. So the fact of the matter is people are caught in a place. But if we look at our history, whether it be Fannie Lou Hamer, and I can name so many, your place does not negate your ability to fight and to protest and to connect love, justice, and truth. Love, justice, and truth. And what greater face on the movement than those who are the ones that know the impact of the violence, the injustice directly. And I want, my prayer with my life is not to use my life so much that folk remember me, but if there's any way I can use my life to empower the people, to give agency. See, I believe, I close here, I believe that the hope for this nation and this world is in the valley of dry bones, among the rejected. That's a scripture in Ezekiel 37. And God told Ezekiel, he asked, can these bones live? They were the broken people. And the prophet said, I don't know. And God said, good. Now do what I tell you. Go down and preach to the bones. He said, preach to the bones. Said, yeah, because the bones may look dead, but they still have ears. They have hearing potential. And you preach to the bones and get them to shake a little bit and gather together and then get out of the way and let my spirit empower them. And then the bones, not you, the bones, the rejected bone, then become the hope. The stones that the builders rejected become the chief cornerstone. So I hope your writings and Jackie's poetry and my feeble attempts at preaching and standing is simply to pull out the agency of the people. And if we can do that, and the people lead and the people push and the people move, when they move, when we move, they move. The structures move. And I hope we can use what gifts we have to be a part. And you know, they say in the church, since you said church, there's an old song that says, what a day of rejoicing it will be when we all see justice, when we all get together. What a day of rejoicing it will be.
Yes. Well, amen. Thank you very, very much. And we've enjoyed this, and I'm glad that the people who were able to join us did, and they learned something. So I guess I end it this way, right? Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Jack, I hope to see you soon. I'll call you.
I'm looking forward to that call. Thank you. Thank you.
Blessings.
Thank you, Leonida.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yes.